do this. This share. All right, cool. So we have Ann Molk here back again for presentation number 2 that she's giving for us this spring. So she's going to talk about practice and game management. And Ann is a wealth of knowledge. While she's not currently involved in lacrosse, she has been involved in lacrosse for
100 years.
For a good long amount of time, from back in her playing days to coaching at pretty much every different level. So please feel free to ask questions to her, and I'll kind of let her give a little bit more detailed introduction and let her take it away. So thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Catherine. I can't call you Catherine with a straight face.
That's okay. Everybody, I don't think people know me as Catherine, so
okay. KK works. Yeah. All right, awesome. So Sarah and Justin, it is the 3 of us tonight talking lacrosse. So while I definitely have a presentation ready to go, and I know this is being recorded so that others can watch it, also please consider this an opportunity to ask as many questions on or off topic as you might have moving forward. So like KK mentioned, I've been coaching for a long time. And I've coached D1, D2, D3. I've coached high school club. I've coached internationally. I've worked for US Lacrosse as a coaching education trainer. I took a hard left about a year and a half ago and started working for a soccer club nearby. So that has been an interesting change. And thanks, Justin. But I'm not coaching. I'm doing administrative kind of work for them, and so it keeps me related to the young athletes. And I have just now, after like a year and a half, started to kind of miss coaching. So never say never. I'll be back in some form or fashion probably soon. But I was real happy when KK asked if I wanted to, participate in this series, because I'm all about education and passing on knowledge to folks, especially those of you who are volunteering undoubtedly to coach your children. That's how most coaches get involved, is, they have a child that wants to play, and they're the parent that doesn't know how to say no to anything. And so they're the ones that end up coaching. And so I want to help make that as easy for you as it can be. I've always been a believer that, just because you have knowledge doesn't mean that why should I control that? Why should I hoard that knowledge? I mean, share it and let people use it just to make the game better. So tonight we're going to talk about practice management, and then specifically game management. And KK and I were talking earlier in the earlier presentation I did about, so often coaches are, it's just them. You don't have an assistant coach, or maybe you don't have an assistant coach who knows a lot about lacrosse. And so sometimes just managing practice can be kind of difficult. And I had given a few options for some drills for some of the things that we were talking about in the transition presentation. And I mentioned that, a couple of these drills were things that you could set up once at the beginning of practice with your cones where they need to be. And then you can really run an entire practice based solely on that setup, so that you're not spending a lot of time, if you've only got an hour with your team, you're not spending a whole lot of time like moving the cones around and changing the lines and changing where the players have to go. And so, this one-time setup for an entire practice can be really, really handy for timing purposes, as well as for purposes of just ease of getting your practice done. Plus, the younger the player is, the less sort of explanation you have to do, which can be helpful as well. You're not having them, now you got to go over to this line, or now you have to go to this line, or that type of thing. So I've got 2 examples of drills slash games you can set up, and then do a whole bunch of different things just based on those setups. So the first one is truly the simplest thing ever, and it is a box drill, right? So you set up on your field whatever space you have available, that just a square, right? You've got cones, you know, you need 4 cones basically. Although I guess if you want to set up several of these 5 by 5, 7 by 7, 10 by 10 yard boxes, you can do as many as you need based on the players that you have, how many players you have at practice. And you just set up this box drill, and that simple setup can provide you with hours of fun, hours of simple drills, whether that be just working on stick work. So for example, if you set this box drill up and then you put 2 players at each of the cones and you send them in a direction, whether that be right to left or left to right, they can just pass the ball in that square to practice their stick skills. Okay. And then you can change the direction and you can change which hand they use. So again, pretty simple. If you want to practice, like catching awkward passes, put a player in the middle of that square and have her feet and her hips always facing the same direction. So if I was in the middle of the square that we're looking at, and you know, I'm going to call up north, right? And my feet are and my hips are always in that direction, whether I'm getting the ball from the person that's passing from the right top cone, the bottom right cone, the bottom left cone, the top left cone. So that helps me turn my torso towards the pass, helps with awkward passes that everybody's going to get, especially with younger players. And then you just rotate the person that is in the middle of the box, and they get their chance to make those passes. So you can build from there. I use the box drill a ton when I work on individual offensive or individual defensive skills. So I would put a player in between the 2 cones at the top of this box, and I would put another player in the middle of the box. And the player that's at the top of the box in between the cones is the attacker, and the player in the middle of the box is the defender. And you start out really easy with the player who is in the attacking position. Her goal is to get across a line that would be between the 2 cones at the bottom of the page. Okay, so it's as if you're trying to sort of play like a Red Rover kind of game, right? You're trying to get across a line. The defender in the middle is trying to deny that attacking player the opportunity to get across that line, right? And so on the offensive side of things, that helps teach a player to maybe change their speed, change their direction from north, south, east, west, maybe back up and then re-attack. So it gives them a lot of opportunities to try to get across that line. And then the player who's defending, they have to learn how to turn their hips, turn their feet so that their feet are going the same direction as the attacker, right? So, if you stand with your feet facing towards the top of the box, but the attacker is coming at you and her feet are going the other direction, you're going to soon learn that you're going to get burned every time because you can't turn that quickly. So you got to get your feet turned and your hips turned so that you're connecting with the attacker as he or she is running towards the line. So that's, another good one that you can use for that. You can have them do it with sticks. You can have the attacker only with sticks. You can have the defender only with sticks. You can have nobody with sticks. You can use pool noodles. We love pool noodles at practice, right? You buy those pool noodles, cut them down, and then that way the player has something in their hands that replicates the feeling of having their stick, and you want to practice having your stick up, but you're not worried as much about them getting hit in the head, getting knocked on the noggin with a stick while they're defending. So, you add a second defender to the box. All right, so now we're practicing double teams. All right. The good thing about the box is that it contains the players, right? So you don't have an attacker, because we've all seen this before. And anybody who's coached today, you've got the kid on the team who's super fast, and they just start running away, right? And that's not particularly helpful when we're trying to train on defense or we're trying to train on double teams. And so you put Fasty in the middle of this box here, and they have to maintain, they can't go outside the box to try to get across the line. That helps the defenders, sort of adjust their bodies so that they can really work on the double team. Put a second attacker in there. All right, so now that there's two attackers and there's two defenders, you add a ball and you talk about how do you get the ball out of a double team, right? So again, it's just the buildup, and so many things in lacrosse when you're at practice can just be built next step upon next step upon next step. KK, you want to go to the next slide and we can just continue kind of walk through, right? So 1v1s, 2v2s, 1v2s, with sticks, without sticks, noodles, putting a player at each cone and passing around, awkward angle throwing. So there, and then will you go back to the box again for me, Kay? Thanks. So it just really is super easy. And again, if you have 12 to 15 players at practice, maybe you set up 3 of these, 2 of these, because one of the other things that you want to consider is while you're at practice, making sure that there's not a lot of standing around. And so instead of having one box drill, you can have a couple of them. So that then everybody's participating. At least they might be a person on the outside of the box. They might not be going the whole time, but they're not waiting for a long time for their turn when you set multiples of these boxes up around the field. If you're lucky enough to have an assistant coach, or you are the assistant coach, or you have like a parent who often stays for the practice, even though they're not a coach, anybody can roll out a ground ball to help your players practice ground ball pickups, right? You don't have to have professional coaching experience to roll a ground ball out for kids, right? So you could have this set up as ground ball drills, and one box could be the ground ball drills, and you could have that helper person be the ground ball thrower. Give them like 2 or 3 points, right? We want to have our hand all the way to the top of the stick so that our hand's touching the head of the stick. We want our bottom hand to be down at the bottom of the stick. Give that helper person just a few key statements or points to point out to the players as they're going through their ground ball pickups. And then maybe you're at a different box drill where you're, working on the double team, right? Because that takes a little bit more coaching and a little bit more information, and then you can have a couple of things going on at the same time. And I'm trying to not go into the practice planning part as much, or the practice management as much. So we'll skip ahead now to the other game, the best game ever. So this truly is kind of a fun and it's the kind of game that you really can do so many different things with. And the other thing that's great about this is that it's a conditioning drill, right? No matter how you run it, no matter how many players you involve with it, they really are working on getting conditioned in the form of lacrosse conditioning, right? So long just running, a couple miles, right? That's helpful, but it's not actually the way that you run on the lacrosse field during the lacrosse game. And so this is one way to include conditioning that's very similar to the cadence of the game. So as you see, you line up all the defenders at either the restraining line, or you can do the 50-yard line, or you could put a line a little bit closer to the top of the 12 if you've got little ones and even the restraining line is too far. And then you put all of the attackers down on the goal line extended. Again, you can do it a couple different ways, right? You can start with the attackers have to get a clear from the goalie, and then every single one of them has to have received a pass by the time they get to that line that's out. Restraining, we'll just call it the restraining line for ease of definition right now. Every attacker has to have received a pass by the time the ball gets to the restraining line. Once that happens, the entire group of attackers turns around and goes to goal. In this case, it would be a 5v5. You can do it with as many or as few players as you want. You can do it with, 5 attackers, 4 defenders. You can do 5 defenders, 4 attackers. Practice your player up, player down scenarios. You can just do it as 1v1s. You can do it where the last player as the defender. I used to do this where I would stand at the restraining line where the defenders are starting, and I would just hold on to the jersey of one kid for a little bit so that she was way behind the rest of them and basically was in recovery mode so that she's going in way late, and that requires then all the rest of the defenders to play player down for a little bit and then recover and realize, okay, my teammate's back in now. Now we're even. Let's communicate about how that works.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those scenarios that you can do again and again and again. It's very game-like, which I find most players really enjoy. It's as close to a scrimmage as you can get without actually scrimmaging. It's also a good one if you don't have a full field, right? If you're sharing a field with another team, or you have more limited space, this is a great one to get more of a full game feel in a smaller space. And so I think, I've added, some things here in terms of how you can adjust this, but I'm sure you all can come up with, a dozen more ways of things that I want to train, things that I want to practice. I'm going to make these all ground balls, or I'm going to make these all, non-dominant hand opportunities, or, we need our goalie to practice her clears. So the goalie's going to clear to everybody. And that's how the attackers are going to get to the restraining line, is that they will go one at a time and get a clear from our goalkeeper, and then they'll wait at the top until everybody finishes and get started. So same thing with the defenders, like I said, holding somebody back, having them practice, maybe a face guard or something as they get back into the defensive end. The other thing that this can do is, especially with your defender, right? So they've had to run from the restraining line down to the goal line extended. And sometimes when they've done that, it can be confusing about which attacker they're going to pick up if you're playing a player-to-player defense, a man-to-man defense. So it's a great opportunity, if you're not using sticks, to just say, okay, once you get to that goal line extended and you turn around to pick somebody up, I need you to call that person's name, right? So if you're struggling with your players matching up man to man, do this. And then I've got Susie, I've got Sarah, I've got Justin, right? Like, they have to communicate that. I find that when you're trying to focus on things like communication or more tactical issues that you're dealing with your players, eliminating the ball on the stick can be really, really helpful, because oftentimes with younger players that struggle to catch well or throw well, they're so focused on, oh, I made a bad pass, or I didn't catch that. It takes the drill an extra 10 minutes because somebody's running to pick up a ground ball. They don't do a very good job of picking up the ground ball, so they're pushing the ground ball down the field. If you can eliminate that stress and focus on what it is you want them to do, whether that's mark player to player, go to a double team, those types of things, do them without the sticks, do them without the balls, get those tactical things understood, and then throw balls and sticks in there to make it more game-like. Anybody questions, thoughts? Anybody feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions. All right, I am so clear. No one has any question. All right, so season management. I kind of approach this from two perspectives. One of them, what is the goal of your team's season, right? Are you looking to just have a really fun experience for 6 weeks of the season, right? And you just want to improve. Is yours the team that's like made up of all the families that all they want to do is win, right? Like it can happen, right? But it's up to you as the coach to kind of set that tone and help the families understand the expectations of the season. And then you got to follow the expectations of that you set for the season, right? So I always recommend that you have a team meeting. It can be, on Zoom like this, where you get everybody in the room and you make very clear to them, this is rec league lacrosse, or this is, the highest level competitive league lacrosse. And if it's rec league lacrosse, that means that everybody who shows up to, enough of the practices, maybe you have 2 practices a week and a game, you have to come to at least one of the practices a week in order to start in the game. And so everybody has to follow those rules. You don't make exceptions. And then everybody feels like they're playing under the same set of rules in terms of participation. It's rec league, which means we're going to focus on getting better, right? And sometimes getting better doesn't mean winning. It just means that we learn to throw better with our non-dominant hand, but that means we may have lost a match. But that's okay. Ooh, see, match came in now. Now that I'm soccer, I say match instead of games. And I don't like that. So, oh, Vegas, yes. So the idea being, go into the season and let everyone know that you're going into the season with a certain set of expectations. If you are the team that wants to win, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But tell people that, right? We're going to play the players. We're going to play the best 7 players. We're going to play the best 12 players, whichever version of lacrosse we're playing right now, right? And it doesn't matter if they didn't show up to practice. It doesn't matter that they're kind of a jerk, right? Like, we're just going to play the best players and we want to win, right? And then that helps people know this is the team for me or this isn't the team for me, right? And you sort of build the culture of your team that way. And I feel like sometimes if a coach doesn't set those parameters out ahead of time, that then allows the families to create the culture of the team, and that may not be what you want as the coach. And so have that philosophy, have the understanding, set it out there, and then make sure that you're following it. Okay, so that's kind of like the big picture season management. And then the other part of season management is to think a little bit about, like, how long is your season? How many games are in your season? Is there a big break somewhere? Is it like a week off for 4th of July? Or, is there another long break in there that, will have an impact on the way that you schedule and plan your season? So think about it from that perspective as well. And I'm a big proponent of kind of working backwards, right? So if the end result is I'm going to play in I want our team to play in the final tournament at the end of the season, and I really want us to be ranked in the top 3 teams for that. How am I going to get there, and kind of back schedule your plans from there? Or, this is a brand new team, and by the end of the season, I want to make sure that my players can do these 3 skills relatively well, and then kind of plan from there, going back to what your goal is at the end. So that's kind of the season planning idea. I have some resources for that too, if anyone's interested for that. The game management side of things, right? So this is, some of this is kind of like more higher level, like high school, yeah, up into college, but like, how are you spending your pre-game time, right? Are you watching the other team's goalie warm up because you want to know if she's a lefty or a righty, and um, is she any good low? Or is it one of those things where it's like, of course she's bad low. All of the goalies are bad low. This is the first year anyone has played, right? And so you're really focusing on your own team, as opposed to trying to, you know, pick up any real thoughts about the other team. Um, but how are your players spending their pregame, is also kind of an interesting question to ask yourself, right? So, are you allowing the first 5 minutes of the warm up to be just kind of like, crazy, we haven't seen each other all day. I'm so excited to see you. What did you do today? Like nothing that has to do with lacrosse. Are you letting them get that out of their systems? And then, 7 minutes in, you're saying, okay, now we're doing our stick skills. Now we're getting ready for the game. That if you like allow that to happen, that might like decrease your stress levels by a whole bunch, because you're not fighting what is almost the inevitable, like, oh, I haven't seen you all day, even though we just saw you yesterday, thing that often happens in girls teams. So how are the players doing that? Again, if you're by yourself, does someone need to be warming up the goalie? Can you be watching your team do their warm-ups? Um, Make sure you have practiced your pregame warm-up before you get to your first game. It doesn't need to be anything like particularly involved, but you don't want to have something new, sort of spring something new on them the day of the game. So kind of a couple days before your first game, talk to your players about, maybe ask them like, what kind of warm up do you think you need to be prepared to play in a game? Maybe they won't know. Maybe they won't be able to explain that to you. But you can then turn them, say, well, we have to have our stick work be really good. Our goalie needs to see a few shots beforehand. And I'd like you to practice your footwork for your defense. And so here are the three sort of things we're going to do for the 15 minutes before game time, and we'll be ready at that point to play our game. So plan that and then communicate that with your team players. More things about game management. How are you determining your starting lineup? As I mentioned before, do you have rules about how many practices the person has to have attended during the week that will allow them to be a starter? Is it a rotating group of, you've got 18 players on your team and you go the first 12, and then 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 or the next day, the next game, they're starters. Again, it's about setting those expectations with families, right? Because you might look, and this has happened on more than one occasion, where I've had a player that I know has played minutes wise the same, if not more minutes than other players, but they know that they haven't started a game. And there is something about being a starter that is important to a lot of players, right? Because there is this image. Sorry, I have to yell at my dog real quick. Norton, stop. No, stop. Sorry. There's something about being a player, that if you're a starter, it means you're the better player, right? That's one of the kind of the cool things that I have learned about in soccer, because soccer has the different like subbing rules that you can't like sub all you want. It's not always the case that your best players are starting. Sometimes you're saving some of your best players for a little sub action when you need it. But anyway, I digress. But just think about that, right? And know that the kids are considering that as well. And then the same thing about subs. Are you subbing every 5 minutes? Are you subbing every other goal? Are you do you have a standard sub because you're trying to just get everybody rotated through, because you're supposed to get everybody about the same number of minutes per game? If that is this case, then you probably are better off having it be like every 5 minutes, some kind of every 7 minutes, every third goal. Like sometimes that one can be weird though, because if it's not a very high scoring game, or if it is a very high scoring game and it's just boom, boom, boom. But think about it. I think that's the most important thing is to have these things kind of considered in your mind before you get out there and try to do it. So you're not caught off guard. I did put on here, try not to sub a player after they've made a mistake, because so often players will think, well, I got taken out because I made a mistake. And I think your biggest mistake as a coach is to not help players understand that mistakes are the only way they learn, and that mistakes are really important to make, that they are okay. And you just don't want a player to think, oh, next time I'm not going to try playing with my left hand because I'm not good at it. I'm going to drop the ball and I'm going to get subbed out because I made a mistake. So that's a little bit of a soapbox for me. But I do think that if you can avoid it, especially if it's just a one for kind of substitution, if it's KK for Ann, if you're subbing 5 players, that's a little bit different because it's not so much like, oh, I'm taking you out because you just made a mistake. But again, just think about it. The other one is the goalkeeper situation, right? Like when they're young, you probably shouldn't have a goalie who's only ever playing goalie. You probably should rotate your players through that position. And it can be really hard for players to give up goals. They feel like, they've let the team down. But if you can have everybody take that experience, it oftentimes will make them have a lot more sympathy for the goalkeeper. It will also sometimes encourage them to play better defense in front of the goalkeeper. But there's just, I don't think, unless you've got a kid who just is like absolutely in love with goalie position, or a parent who's saying absolutely not, my kid will not be standing in a goal having a ball thrown at her. You should try to rotate as best you can, giving those girls opportunities to try all those positions. What else we got on here? Anything?
I would add like being mindful of the age that you're coaching and thinking of like, at 8U and 10U levels, like we're really trying to foster like community and that kind of stuff. And so like, as long as if you have a kid that's not showing up to practice, for sure don't start them. But like, I think making sure you're rotating and having different people be starters, especially when it's a 4v4 situation at the 8U. But I think even at 10U, trying to rotate that. And then, like Ann said before, like being upfront with the parents too on how you're going to determine the starting lineup and how you're going to determine subbing. Like if you're going to go every 5 minutes, you want everybody to get equal playing time. I think being upfront with parents on that front can be really helpful too. I mean, maybe not so much at the younger levels, but we're seeing more and more involved parents at the younger levels. So I think the more upfront you can be with that stuff at the beginning, the more helpful it will be throughout the season, that you won't have people calling you or coming up to you after practice, asking you about your coaching decisions.
Yeah. Let's go next slide if we can, KK.
Yeah.
So just a couple of other things that you want to think about as you're going through the game. What is your pregame pump up, right? Do you have a pregame speech that you're going to give? Is it more sort of, here are the 3 things that I want you to focus on during this first quarter? How you guys playing halves still at the youth age?
They're all in quarters now.
They're all in quarters now.
Yep.
Okay. So, this first quarter, here's our 2 goals. We're going to work on, getting our hands high and our butts low to pick up all the ground balls. Give them something to work on each quarter. And then what are you saying to them at halftime? What are you saying to them after the game? These are all the things that you just have to start to think about as a coach. And you have to learn to kind of read the room, as they say, right? Like your players come off the field and you thought they played horribly, but they're in like the best mood ever and they're cheering each other on. maybe you have to adjust your attitude, and maybe you say to them, hey, you guys, you came off really excited. Tell me why it is that you're so excited about, how that all went. Maybe you'll see a whole different perspective on why they came off the field, feeling good about what they've done. Or maybe they come off the field really, really disheartened. Maybe the other team scored a whole bunch of goals on them, but that they did a couple of the things that you asked them to do really, really well during that quarter. Make sure that you work to kind of get them back focused on, what your goals were for, for that quarter or for the game or whatnot. This kind of goes to the one that I wrote here about, how do you handle if you're killing a team, right? How do you work to have good sportsmanship? How do you work to, enjoy the game? Because, even winning in a blowout isn't all that fun. I mean, it can be, but it's not all that fun. And certainly losing in a blowout is really, really hard. And so, have yourself prepared to change the goalpost is what I would say, right? So in particular, when you're talking about, a loss by a significant amount, what you have to be able to do is sort of change the goalposts and say, right, yeah, we didn't win on the scoreboard, but, Angela had 3 great ground ball pickups, and we were able to do that double team on defense that time, and I asked you to work on that. So kind of change the definition of success is often the way to kind of work around kind of a big loss in a close game. How are you handling it when you just won a really tight game? Like, those are the most fun, right? As a coach, you're like woohooing everywhere because you just won a close game. But if you lose a close game, then those are those moral victories that we like to talk about, right? Is we won, we didn't win on the scoreboard, but we came so close and we came back and thought we'll get them next time kind of scenarios. And then what do you do about the bad refs, right? First of all, my understanding is that the majority of the refs that you all see will probably be high school aged young women, maybe a little bit older. So have some perspective as a coach on who it is that's reffing. Have some grace for those folks. But there will be times when officials make bad calls. And you do have to be able to try to explain that to your players. None of us is perfect. Again, this whole thing about making mistakes, everybody makes mistakes. Just sometimes people's mistakes have a bigger impact than other people's mistakes. And if you're able to have the focus not always be on the score at the end of the game, then a bad ref situation is a lot less painful to players in that sense. And then this is the one that I hate, but we have to talk about. What if the parents have gotten out of control, right? Whether those are the parents that are your team's parents or other team's parents, they're yelling at your kids, they're yelling at the officials, they're yelling at the other parents. Like, this is one of those, again, you have that preseason conversation with families about what your expectations are of them as supporters of your team, that you're not going to condone or allow abusive language towards refs or players on your sideline, and definitely hold them accountable to that. One of the great things that so I did some training in the past for the Positive Coaching Alliance, which, if you don't know, check them out. They're a great resource for parents and coaches in terms of dealing with some of the negativity that comes with youth sports. But one of the best things that we ever taught during PCA trainings was, you buy a bunch of blow pops or suckers at the beginning of the season, and you have a parent on your team who can like handle all the other crazy parents, and you give them that bucket of suckers. And then when you've got a crazy parent on the sideline, you get the parent that you assigned the suckers to just walk over. You just hand them the sucker, put it in your mouth, you stop yelling. It's a really nice way to kind of ease the anger, remind people like, hey, this is your child's game. This isn't, the end of times. You need to kind of control yourself, but just kind of, it's like putting a pacifier in a baby's mouth, right? You just put that sucker in somebody's mouth, and hopefully they get the gist of it when you hand them the sucker. But just be ready for it, because it's going to happen, unfortunately. That is the extent of my presentation for the evening. I did want to leave some time for questions. I know, Sarah, you mentioned that you're in Vegas and perhaps not able, but I'm going to, oh, look, brand new girls U14 head coach. He has a team of 26. It's a brand new, has boys coaching background. Oh, goodness. Yay. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think the biggest takeaway for me is be prepared, communicate with your families, and don't hesitate to reach out with any questions that you would have of me, because I think, like many people, when we have a knowledge and we're good at something, we like to talk about ourselves and share that information with other people. So any questions, anything I could go into a little bit more deeply? I left too much time for questions. Cakes, what are your thoughts about handling kind of that parent, uh, both in the preseason meeting and also like in the moment, parents that are getting upset
Yeah.
about things?
I mean, thankfully, I haven't had to deal with it too much. And I think part of that is because, like, you guys taught me well to have those preseason meetings and set the expectations up front. And I feel like once parents know that, they tend to do better because they've been told what the expectation is and what you will be okay with and what you won't be okay with. Having worked at the spring and summer, well, only the spring last year, the spring state tournaments, we did have some rowdy parents that did have to get excused from the field. And so I think that in the moment, it's something that nobody wants to deal with. But I think that, like, just explaining that they need to sit this one out and, like, reminding them that it's their kid's game and, like, it is their child that they are out there watching. I think the more that you can emphasize that, kind of can bring them back down, because you can get really, excited, and sometimes the refs don't see things the same way that you do. But there are some games where we only have one ref, like the 8U and the 10U. There's one official, and they only have two sets of eyes, and they can't be in every position to make the call. And so I think we just have to give, obviously, the officials grace at certain points, and remember that we're also setting not the expectation, but we're setting the model for our children. And so if we're going to do this, then what are our kids going to do, and how are they going to react to the officials? So I think trying to get them out and removed is probably the best thing that we have had experience with. And then I think making sure, if it is a tournament format, like, we've had to make sure that the next time that team plays, that somebody is there, so that if the parent gets too excited again, that somebody's there to kind of help make sure that it's not all on the officials to get them off of the field, because that's not the official's job, and nor should it be. So,
yeah. So Sarah's put up a question here about playing against a team that's aggressive or has played together more often, and you have a team that's pretty inexperienced or not very aggressive. I think, Sarah, what I would say to that is that's when you really have to, first of all, you have to have created a culture within your team that they understand what their goal is, right? So if you've mentioned in your previous message, 20 of these players are going to be brand new to lacrosse. So the realistic, if you're very realistic about that, your team's going to lose a lot of games this year if they're playing against a bunch of players who have played before. It just is, like, nobody is going to argue that isn't what's going to happen, right? So you have to change the expectation of success, right? The expectation of success isn't that we win by numbers, the expectation for success is that, you know, we improved how our ground ball pickups, we got 50% of the ground ball pickups in the game, where, last week we only got 30% of the ground ball pickups in the game. Or, we had, 4 more draw controls in this game than we did in the previous game. You know, it just, you just have to change the target. And I think that is, I think newer coaches just kind of don't understand that, right? You're brought up in this world of the only thing that matters whether you won or lost the game, right? You come up to a kid after a game and you say, hey, how'd it go? Most of the time they're going to say, oh, we lost or we won. They're not going to say, oh, I had fun, or I had 6 ground ball pickups, right? But that's up to us as the coaches to say to them, like, when I ask you how the game went, I don't really care if you won or lost. I want to know if you had fun. I want to know if you learned something. I want to know if you were a good teammate. Change the target, and then that allows for success to be more than a win or a loss, right? And at some point, when the kids are better, when they're better players, they will start to win. But if you're only focusing on wins or losses at the very beginning, you're going to lose those kids, because they are going to lose. There are going to be a lot more L's than W's, a lot more goals for the other team than for your team in the beginning. And I don't know that there's any way to get around that, right? You just have to get better. That's true of any sport. Yeah, so I hope that's helpful.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is like taking and having the other players recognize, like your team recognize what the other team is doing really well, so that they can learn from them and take something away. So especially when, like, if you have a team of 20 people that have never played before, like, that's awesome. And this is a great opportunity for them to watch people that have been playing longer than they have. And so what can they take away from that player's game that they can then learn and implement in their game? Because a lot of the time, the best way to learn is to do it and to watch other people do it. And so if there's 20 of them that have never played before, they're not going to have a ton of people on their team to learn from. And so when you're playing those teams, what are some things that they can do to implement into their game, whether it's like an attack play, or it's the way that somebody cradles, or the way that she passes, or the double team that this team set that is really good, or how they take the draw, just some little things like that they can, like, there is a reason why we want to play teams that are better than us, because it challenges us and we can learn from them also. I think is a good way to spin it, so that the kids also know that they're getting something out of it.
That's a great point, KK. I think the other thing that allows is for the coach on the sidelines. Like, the more I started coaching, the longer I coached, I should say, the more I realized that coaching the kids that were out on the field during the game was kind of pointless, right? Because they're playing, they're not listening. Maybe every once in a while they'd hear something that I had to say. Really, it's the coaching the kids who are standing next to you on the sideline that is the best, because they're watching what you're watching.
Yep.
And you can make the corrections and talk about the right thing to do, point out what the other team did well, or what their teammates did well. So that just kind of builds on what you're saying, KK, is like, stand on the sideline as the coach and go, wow, did you see how well their team, that girl played defense in that one-on-one, right? And teach that to the 6 players that are on the sideline with you, so that when they go out on the field, they can try it themselves, right? And then give them a whole bunch of praise for trying it, whether they were successful or not. Yeah, I think that's a good point, KK.
Yeah, and I know we're talking a lot about stats, so trying to find a parent volunteer, like somebody that's going to sit on the sidelines and do stats. I know there's hopefully probably at least one person. I know that I've talked to some parent friends that like to do that role so that they don't have to converse with other parents. So I'm sure that you can probably find somebody that can take stats for you guys for those games, because I think that is really helpful. I mean, and to just see the progress, and even like quarter by quarter, that the coach can bring up at practice the next time. You're not necessarily going to see all of that stuff right away in game, depending on how quickly they can get over to the sidelines. But I think that that's something that is really helpful, and that most parents would be happy to do once they know what stat they need to be taking.
Yeah. And you can make up stats too, right? Like it doesn't just have to be like what you would see on a traditional stat sheet. You
Yeah.
can talk about how many passes did somebody make. Like that's not a real stat. But if you want to encourage your team to pass more and not just have kids run straight down the field to the goal, put a passing stat on there. Like make it what you want to.
Yeah.
Make a stat out of things that you think are important and then praise for that.
For sure.
We're tearing it up. We're tearing up the rules here. We're making it our own. Yeah. Well, should we give the world 9 minutes back?
I think maybe, yeah. Unless Justin, you have any questions?
I do not.
Awesome. That means you did your job well, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, we will let you all go and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Anne.
everybody.
Woo. Well, it was nice to have people.
Yeah.
Let me get this guy out. I don't know if I don't want to do that. Stop recording.